Thanks to all of you for joining today's public lecture. Thanks to all of you for the invitation that lets us hold this presentation here and introduce a little bit to the topic of capacity building and capacity development, right? And for those of you who don't know about the Rhine-Waal University of Applied Sciences, I just want to tell you, small but new and very innovative University of Applied Science of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. So basically here, just 100 something kilometers down the river at the lower Rhine region where the river crosses the border to the Netherlands, right in Kleve is our main campus located. And I joined there 2013, and in 2015 or until 2015, we designed a program on sustainable development management. So basically, we do not add another full-fledged development studies program to the European development studies program that are out there, but we take the focus on how to manage projects and interventions in the international development arena. That's basically what our students learn there on a master's level. Right. And around this study program, we have a lot of research activities going on. Currently, we are working mostly on this Transreg-Int project, which is a BMBF-funded initiative within the funding grant line of Innovative Hochschule. And their capacity building is one of the research packages. And what we want to do today, Taya and me, want to introduce you a little bit into our current research and the first conclusions that we can draw from that. Because I guess you as development experts, you have not only once used the term of capacity building or capacity development, maybe in a paper or in any, I don't know, application to a grant or something, right? We all use these words basically every day, and they're quite fancy. And we wanted to find out, what is it? And what's the size and the significance of that concept? Is there a concept, right? And how can we make sense of that? And now there's the occasion that we found out that this whole concept or the whole discussion about capacity building or capacity development now has marked the 30th anniversary, because we did a tracer study that basically Taya will present, where we went back in the literature, but also in development projects of multinational development banks, when these words were used for the first time. And it turned out that since 1990s, they started to evolve. And this is basically the empirical database that we use. We'll go more into details within a few minutes. And this is why we'll be talking about the history of the concept. We talk about definitions, and then we come with our own theoretical considerations and how we can empirically test these. And then we present the results and conclude limitations outlook as always. Yeah, capacity building or capacity development has, as I said, gained considerable prominence, right? Not only in development arena, right? Also in other neighboring fields, it is very often used, right? But as we found out by reviewing the literature, is that the term rests on shallow grounds, right? It is simply used without any mostly without any definition, without any concept behind it, right? So foundations of the concept are vague, basic principles are mostly unknown. There's a little bit of discussion of what it really is in the literature. And this is why we said we have to do some research here because it is so widely used. So what we wanted to achieve is to identify common definitions for capacity development and also see whether there are differences in the definitions across various academic disciplines. But also what we are interested in with the applied focus is whether there is also differences between the use of the term capacity building between the academic discourse and the practitioner's discourse. Right. And this is why we always looked at academic literature, but also all of the project reports that we find out there from multinational development banks. And we wanted to measure the quantitative significance in practice and its breadth and significance. And this is where we provide you with some insights. The literature on capacity development basically dates back to the early 1980s. Some authors claim that already in the 1970s, especially when it comes to institutional strengthening considerations, came along and terms like that were used. But what we see is that the majority of publications on the term of capacity development or capacity building started basically in the 1990s, and then the majority was there in the 2000s. Of course, we guess that this is also due to the influence of the ideas of Taisiya North, right, on the role of institutions in the development process, of course. And most interestingly is that this concept, even if it is maybe not a concept, right, gained official recognition by the OECD DAC in the Aid Effectiveness Declaration 2005 in Paris and the Accra Agenda for Action. And this is what we can read there. Without robust capacity, strong institutions, systems, and local expertise, developing countries cannot fully own and manage their development processes. We agreed in the Paris Declaration that capacity development is the responsibility of developing countries, with donors playing a supportive role, and that technical cooperation is one of the means, among others, to develop capacity. Okay, so there's an official recognition here from a not quite unimportant actor in this whole arena. So we thought, okay, now there is a rigor definition that is actionable. But actually, we failed. There is no definition, right? Afterwards, the literature continues to speculate about what it is. And the simple agreement we can find is that capacity development is something complex, something multidimensional, right? Being means and at the same time, right? And of course, we also have literature that says, due to the lack of definition, right, we also don't have an effective implementation of capacity building projects. So we quote here one of the sources saying, capacity development is a wide currency in the development community. To our point of view, the best definition that we found is from the UNESCO 2010, which says capacity building or capacity development is the process by which individuals, groups, organizations, institutions, and societies increase their abilities to perform core functions, solve problems, define and achieve objectives, and understand and deal with their development needs in a broad context in a sustainable manner. Okay, and this is where we said, yeah, that is a working definition. There's something we can work with. Now let's take this as our working definition. And what we can derive from that is already that, capacity development is something multidimensional. And by looking at how capacity development can be put in place in practice, we said, okay, yes, there's different levels that we have to act upon. We have, of course, capacity building on the individual level, right? This is what we see: training, further education, something like that. But we also see capacity development going on the organizational level, right? Like organizations are being reformed, right? New incentive and management incentive structures and management procedures are implemented in organizations. This is what we see in development. And also sometimes we see changes on the system level where, for example, World Bank or other donors, they also finance consultancies towards the legislation on the national level in order to change systems. And based on that definition, we say, okay, it is something that is maybe intertwined across these levels. The micro level, the individual level, we call it micro, the meso level, the in-between level, let's call it organizational, and the macro level, more focusing on the systems level of a development intervention. Now, if we continue to think about how these are intertwined, then we see projects in reality which focus on the individual level, leave out the organizational and the system level, and then come up with very, let's say, unsustainable results. There's this common example from Southeast Asia, where the Asian Development Bank in the early 2000s financed a lot of sewage treatment plants all across Southeast Asia. And these were fully fledged, constructed, everything was there. People were trained and skilled. They turned it on. And then there was no national regulation of what you will do with the waste, the toxic waste that comes out of such a sewage treatment plant, right? And then at a certain point, you need to stop this whole plant unless you have a regulation in place that says, what are you doing with the toxic waste? So we see these levels, they are intertwined. And we hypothesize that, of course, the results change is non-linear, right? This is also white currency in development management nowadays, right? But we also see that the outputs of each level influence inputs and processes of other levels. I know this picture is not perfect. We are still drafting on a perfect solution, but what it should display is this intertwined character of such interventions from different levels on the final capacity development outcome at the end. And then we thought about complementarities. That is something we read in the literature, and we went back to Michael Kramer's O-ring theory, 1993, where we basically formulate a Kramer-type production function that says it's a production function, so capacities, the total capacities within a country is a production function that has strong complementarities between the capacities across these levels. So C total is C micro times C meso times C macro. And of course, if you now ask the question, where do you spend the next additional dollar? Should I spend it on the individual, the organizational, or the system level, right? Then the answer is clear. You have to put it there where it has the biggest impact on increasing the capacities on the total level or the total capacities of the country. And of course, algebraically, it should be such that there is an equity between these levels. And then if you have reached equity, right, then you spend your dollar 30%, 30%, so one third to these three levels. But there might be also more levels than that, okay? This is not what we're saying. It is three levels. We only say it's multi-levels, and we just use three levels in order to put this idea forward. So the ideal capacity building project maybe should look like addressing the various levels at the same time. And this is what we're trying to empirically test, right? And this is basically one of the strings in our research project where we are currently working on, right? There's some hurdles to that, and we'll talk about that later at the end. But before we go there, Taya will present you our first results that we found based on a compiled project database from 5 multinational development banks, where we looked at the projects and we identified capacity building projects, and we looked at their size and significance and volume. Taya.
Hello, thanks again for having me here. So do you hear me well? Perfect. So I will briefly talk about the results that we currently already have. That's the study on quantitative significance, the breadth of the capacity building concept, and what we happily can say is that this is the first attempt to quantify capacity building, capacity development on a broad scale. What we did is we harmonized project level databases from 5 major development banks and organizations. These are the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and the United Nations Development Program. We unified the data to have title and description that were later used in our identification strategy. And we also had data on country and thus region where the capacity building interventions were taking place, the sector, date of approval to see the evolution over time, and the allotted budget. What we then did with this database that compiled over almost 75,000 projects is we used computational text analysis to see which projects had the wording of capacity building, capacity development, or various abbreviations of thereof. And then said, if it is there in title or description, we treat this project as a capacity building project. Out of those that we compiled, 2.4% were classified as capacity building development, and the budget that was allotted to this projects category reached 0.8%. So here we'll look in more detail to the evolution over time. You see on the x-axis, these are years, and big blue bars, these are the real number of projects per year, peaking in 2012 at almost 120 projects. Then on the left-hand side, this is the number of projects in actual number, and to the right-hand side, this is the percentage, the share of capacity building projects within the total of number of projects per year, the yellow line, and the red dashed line is the share of capacity building project budget within the total project budget per year. What you can see from this graph is the first fact. Capacity building or capacity development in some form appeared in title or description for the first time in 1990. We had data dating back to 1947, and over that time, there wasn't a single project that had capacity building, capacity development in either title or description. Then the real development was in the first decade of the century. So from 2000 to 2010, there is constant growth in the number and shares of both number and volume of capacity building initiatives. And then in the last decade, we see a slight decrease in number. The share of capacity building projects in the total number of projects remains on average relatively high. So as we say, it's at 3.4%, while the budget, on the contrary, drops significantly, which we see as the first sign of defunding of the concept, at least in the form of projects where it's mentioned in title or description. We also look at sectoral distribution. Here, notable is that public administration and agriculture are in the lead, both in terms of volume and number of projects. Noteworthy is also that urban development has surprisingly big shares. So within the total number of projects devoted to urban development sectors, those that are capacity building are relatively high. So is the funding towards that sector. And in terms of in terms of budget, of course, education here also comes in the picture as quite expected. Looking at the regions, we see that Sub-Saharan Africa is an ultimate leader in both the number and the budget, and Southeast Asia also keeps up when we look at funding. Another interesting finding is that we see first evidence from so-called relationship or inverse U-shaped relationship between development status and the number of capacity building investments, projects happening on the country level. So what we have plotted here is the total number of capacity building projects per using as a proxy for development status. We have here income level. And then we say, with the increase of income, the needs for capacity development decrease. So we see less capacity building initiatives being implemented in high income countries. But at the same time, you do need some background, some initial basic level of capacity to build up on. So it's not the low income, it's rather lower middle income countries that receive the biggest share of capacity building interventions. We also took a first glimpse into how capacity building projects are evaluated. This is only based on the World Bank data because we combined it with the independent evaluation group data on World Bank projects. And we come to a surprising finding that capacity development projects actually receive worse evaluation outcome. This is a statistically significant result, and the averaged quantified Likert scale for capacity versus non-capacity projects can be seen on the slide as 0.2 versus 0.4. And with this, I hand over back to Professor Serfling to conclude on the current research and move forward.
Thanks. Yeah, what can we say now, right? We see that there is an emerging trend when it comes to capacity development and development practice, but it's a broken trend, right? So the best years were the 2010s, actually. Nonetheless, the popularity remains high, right? But it seems, obviously, at least for the projects that we identified, right, that the banks are not willing to put that much money into these projects anymore. And what we also find is that the income level of a recipient country predicts the amount of CD funding. That fits quite well to our hypothesis, right? Because we say you need to have already a little bit of capacity there in order to increase the capacity. So I think that corroborates our hypothesis quite well, the latest finding. But what we see is, okay, there is not. If we go back to the last slide, right, it's not like we said, okay, capacity development projects, they should achieve better and more sustainable evaluation outcomes. No, the opposite is true, right? And if it were just at random, then we wouldn't have any statistical significance here, but it is statistically significant. It's statistically significant that capacity development projects receive lower funding, lower volumes than non-capacity development projects. And this is a picture which is true across sectors, right? Otherwise, you could say, in infrastructure, you have large projects and so on, right? But no, this is true for all of the sectors that we had a look at, and evaluation outcomes are worse. So, that's enough food for thought for our discussion here, and enough for us to continue our research project, because so many interesting findings. We know it's not perfect at all, so we need to continue working at the data, right? And what we are currently doing is we're analyzing the project appraisal documents of the World Bank. Unfortunately, or let's say, it's a blessing that the World Bank provides that excellent data, and all of the documents are there, all of the evaluation reports are there, so you can scrape them and can run computational text analysis methods on these, right? But unfortunately, the other banks don't do it to that extent. So this means the deeper we go in our research, the more we are limited to World Bank data, but at least that is something, right? So we are analyzing now the project appraisal documents of the World Bank in order to identify whether one or more levels are addressed within the intervention. And in order to find out to what extent these levels are addressed, we also want to go back to the procurement databases that are also publicly available in order to see, okay, what are the working packages and how much money is behind each of these working packages, and can we sum it up? So we also need to continue working our identification strategies. So we're looking at co-locations of words that might also describe capacity development or capacity building besides this term, right? So we're looking for synonyms. And yeah, we will also continue working with the evaluation data that is available. And we're very happy to learn that the KfW also now provides a huge database on their evaluated projects. Unfortunately, it's not yet publicly available, but we're in touch with Professor Kleve in Frankfurt or Berlin. And I think this is also another string of research that we can continue to go along. Thank you very much. Now we are highly interested in your comments. So thanks for your attention. And yeah, let's start the discussion.